Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Pricify Podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Telegram, and Twitter, all of which are in the low bar. In addition to supporting me on Locals, where you can get exclusive content, interact with the channel directly, and make recommendations for future content and guests, you can also support me on Buy Me a Coffee and Subscribestar. As per usual, at around the 40-45 minute mark, I'll engage with the chat. I will read supers first and any other chats, comments as they are relevant or as time permits. I see we already have Minoan in the chat and Heisvey. Hello. So, this is part 2 of my 3-part series on E.M. Forster's The Machine Stops. One thing that maybe I should have started the whole series with is the name of the 2 characters. The only 2 named characters in the story, Kuno and Vashti. So Kuno is a Germanic word which seems to be a derivative of Conrad, which means brave or courageous or brave counselor. And of course, it's Kuno that is the one who seeks to leave the machine. His name is somewhat of a foreshadowing. His mother, Vashti, for those who've read the Bible, they might remember the book of Esther, where Vashti is the queen of Ahasuerus, who, when he commands her to come before him in a party, refuses and therefore is demoted and replaced by eventually Esther. It's a Persian word which is derived from vahista, which means best or excellent. Now, in this case, it's probably a parody because Vashti is hardly the best or excellent, unless it's a ironic meaning because she's an excellent follower of the machine. After all, he says that she's like a white as fungus in a lump of flesh. So given what we're going to see in chapter 2, his sort of a physical culture focus, Vashti is not excellent from the perspective of the philosophy that he's advocating. But it might be the case that Vashti is excellent for the machine, so it could be a layered meaning here. But authors typically, especially in this time, when they pick the name, they pick names on purpose. Names were not something that was left to chance. And given that these names have specific meanings, I think we can read something into that. There are 2 philosophical themes in this chapter. One is Protagoras. Kuno mentions that man is the measure of all things, which I'll get into in a little bit later, as well as a retelling of the allegory of Plato's cave, where the realm of the machine is the cave with all of these shadows cast on the wall through these high-tech simulations, and he attempts to escape. And much like in the allegory of Plato's cave, nobody believes him. So one of the things that was mentioned in our first chapter, but not really explained, was the idea of homelessness. Homelessness is explained a little bit in part 2. It means the machine will expel you into the world outside. Many in the machine, including Vashti, believe you will die. Kuno's escape demonstrates this is not necessarily so, especially as he sees people living outside. So to sort of break down chapter 2 into broad literary themes before we get into individual details, Vashti arrives at Kuno's apartment. Kuno then explains to her that he found a way out of the machine into the open air. And he discusses his journey out from the machine, his experiences in the open air. There's a portion of it that's slightly difficult to read. He seems to be talking about 3 different air pressure areas, the air pressure of the machine itself, some sort of cul-de-sac, and then the higher air above. And it's difficult for him to breathe any of the air outside of the machine, which is why he takes a respirator. But he can't really get to the higher air above, partly because it's more rarefied and difficult for him to breathe, given his dependency on the machine. We also find, even though we see this kind of humanist interpretation of life with Protagoras' man as the measure of all things, we see that Kuno says he hears a message to leave the machine in the silence of the outer world. And it's interesting that we read that God is heard in the silence, 1 Kings 19:12. Now, he might be saying that, this is some other God than the God of the Bible, but he's certainly using a biblical allusion, so to speak. Now, this is an interesting section which deals with the idea of escaping the machine, which, again, is relevant to this channel because that's what I've been talking about a lot over the last few months. He says, but these days it was a detriment to be muscular. Each infant was examined at birth, and all who had promised undue strength were destroyed. Humanitarians may protest, but it would have been not it would have been no true kindness to let an athlete live. He would never have been happy in that state of life to which the machine had called him. He would have yearned for trees to climb, rivers to bathe in, meadows and hills against which he might measure his body. Man must be adapted to his surroundings, must he not? In the dawn of the world, our weakly must be exposed on Mount Tagatus. In its twilight, our strong will suffer euthanasia, that the machine may progress, that the machine may progress, that the machine may progress eternally. So there's a lot to unpack in this paragraph. First of all, Mount Tagaeus is the mountain to which, according to Plutarch, the Spartans exposed by throwing off the cliff to die malformed or weak infants in order to have a elite warrior caste society. So here, this is sort of like an inversion of Sparta in the sense that the machine wants weak people. That's sort of easy to understand, right? Weak people can't leave the machine. Weak people are dependent upon the machine, right? If you had strong people, you might have Luddites who want to take up hammers to destroy the machine, which it can't have. And furthermore, there's another less direct reason why the machine might want to do this, right? In addition to controlling people in the sense of dealing with malcontents that might try to disrupt the system, it's initially profitable to have all of life's necessities to be mediated through economic exchange in order to make the individual completely dependent upon market forces. And you might even take that a step further to make all human needs, so food, clothes, and shelter, dependent upon technical processes to make people dependent on the machine. And so, as the old adage says, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. People that are completely dependent in such a way will not resist or even think of resisting that which feeds them. And so we see also back to chapter 1, Vashti's miserable physical condition is the logical result of such a situation. And what happens then is that she's, as we saw in the last episode, she was even afraid to leave her apartment, even afraid to go on an airship, even afraid to be touched. Now, with regards to Kuno, he gives us a brief description of how he got healthy enough to leave the machine. He said, but I had got back the sense of space and man could not resist them. I determined to get in the hole and climb the shaft. And so I exercised my arms day after day. I went through ridiculous movements until my flesh ached, and I could hang by my hands and hold the pillow of my bed outstretched for many minutes. Then I summoned a respirator and started. So I think we can argue that what he's doing here is what's technically called calisthenics, which is the sort of practice of exercise where you use body weight motions. And it shows you that humanity has degraded to such a level that holding a pillow outstretched is considered a form of exercise. So it's not looking great for humanity at this point. And then he says, you know that we have lost the sense of space. We say space is annihilated, but we have annihilated not space, but the sense thereof. We have lost part of ourselves. I determined to recover it, and I began by walking up and down the platform on the railway outside my room, up and down, until I can get quickly on my feet, and not a place to which the train of the airship will take me quickly. Far is the place to which I cannot get quickly on my feet. The vomitory is far, though I could see there in 38 seconds by summoning the train. Man is the measure. That was my first lesson. Man's feet are the measure for distance. His hands are the measure for ownership. His body is the measure for all that is lovable, desirable, and strong. Then I went further. It was then that I called to you for the first time, and you would not come. All right, so what we see here is back in the chapter 1, Vashti says, oh, our silly ancient forebears wanted to move us around to locations, but since everything's the same all over the world, we decided to bring stuff to us. And so this is an explicit rebellion against that kind of thinking, even if it isn't, quote, convenient or, quote, efficient. Man is the measure of all things according to Forster, very literally, because it's his appendages and limbs which are the units of measurement. So, for example, in the Bible, a cubit is the length from his longest finger to his elbow, which is not, a consistently uniform measurement because all men have different lengths of from the longest finger to the elbow. But then what Forrester's doing here is he's moving from that and saying, okay, well then, man himself. So he's taking a humanist position. I'm not sure if Forrester was an atheist or just a deist or a pantheist. It's not entirely clear, but he's taking a anthropocentric position here, especially vis-a-vis the machine itself. And so there's an interesting insight here that we're seeing now. Those people that are, quote, terminally online, terminally in Cubeville, terminally living in their apartments, and allow the machine to feed, clothe, and shelter them, are too weak to even walk outside. And so it turns out that one precondition to escaping the machine is a level of physical condition in which you can move around and do things without any machine apparatus. Now, the other thing is, where is Kuno getting these ideas from, right? Because back in chapter 1, we read that ideas are everything. Nothing in nature is pleasing to Vashti because she gets no ideas from them. She only gets ideas about nature if the machine echoes it back through documentaries or lectures. It's not explicitly stated, but I think what Forrester is trying to tell us here is that because Kuno gets ideas from the stars, i.e. nature, the idea then is that there's a kind of like spiritual awakening happening in Kuno, a kind of prophetic moment where he's beginning to realize just the kinds of things one would have to do in order to leave the machine without any one person telling him, because nobody inside the machine will tell him. You might even argue in the sense that there's the way he relates to the dead. There seems to be with Forrester this idea that the voices of the past can reach us. Now, it's not clear whether that's through books, which of course that is the case in many cases. But I think in The Machine Stops, you're not going to find books like that. No, you will find some. He does talk about that. So maybe it is partly books. I'll get to that later. But then the other thing is, he mentions as he's leaving the machine, he hears the voices of those who help build the tunnels say, leave, follow us, and eventually nature itself calling. This city, as you know, is built deep beneath the surface of the earth with only the vomitories protruding. Having paced the platform outside my room, I took the lift to the next platform and paced that also. And so with each turn until I came to the topmost, above which begins the earth, all the platforms were exactly alike. And all that I gained by visiting them was to develop my sense of space in my muscle. I think I should have been content with it. Content with this. It is not a little thing. But as I walked and brooded, it occurred to me that our cities had been built in the days when men still breathed the outer air, and that there had been ventilation shafts for the workmen. I can think of nothing but these ventilation shafts. Had they been destroyed by all the food tubes and medicine tubes and music tubes that the machine had evolved lately, or did traces of them remain? One thing was certain. If I came upon them anywhere, it would be in the railway tunnels of the topmost story. Everywhere else, all space was accounted for. Okay. Now, this is very important. I just realized this. There was a foreshadowing of Kuno's escape. When we read about the airships in chapter 1, we were told that it was less expensive to allow the obsolete airships to operate than it was to remove them. That's foreshadowing because it's showing us that the earlier constructs that were used to get to the machine might be allowed to continue to exist as a kind of vestigial organ to the machine because it was not energy efficient to get rid of them. And with that insight, we, the reader, can realize, hey, wait a minute. Kuno might find one of these vestigial organs, so to speak, of the machine in order to escape. And that's exactly what he does. Escaping the machine into silence of the outer world, Kuno realizes the noise surrounding us. The light helped me for a little, and then came darkness, and worse still, silence, which pierced my ears like a sword. The machine hums, do you know that? Its hum penetrates our blood and may even guide our thoughts. Who knows? I was getting beyond its power. Then I thought, this silence means that I am doing wrong. But I heard voices in the silence, and again they strengthened me. He laughed. I had need of them. The next moment I cracked my head against something. Now, One of the things that you'll read about when you read about the beginning of the Industrial Revolution is that when you have machines operating more or less continually, there's a sense of unending din that they produce, which prior people had never heard. When you had these factories or guns going off, uh, it was completely unknown to them. Now, this is the opposite now, right? Kuno is so well accustomed, so well acclimated to the noise and the hum of the machine that when he leaves it, he's shocked by the silence. It's an inversion of what man came from. And this, of course, is the retelling of Plato's cave, right? He's deep down inside, with all these, shadows on the wall, which are documentaries and lectures of the real world, the world that isn't, because it's just the machine. Now, at this point, I'll have to admit as well, this is an expression of a term that did technically exist at the time, but not fully fleshed out, of simulacra. The machine was giving everybody inside a simulacra in various levels of simulation. When we get to part 3, we'll even see that people begin to treat the machine as God. So it makes reference only to itself. It's pure hyper reality, which is where the machine then collapses into the desert of the real. So we can see that there's a sort of level of technical language that we can borrow from a Baudrillard, from an Ellul, from a Tainter, that allows us to understand the ideas in this slim volume. But this guy, without any of the technical language, with a pure visionary insight, could describe all of this. It's the closest thing you're going to find to prophecy, I think, anywhere in the last 200 years. So let's see here. The other thing was he talks about what he learned. He said, I knew that I was in Essex. So basically, as he's getting out, there's basically one of those round doors you have to unscrew from to get out of the sewers to then go up into the outer air. He goes into the outer air. There's like this cul-de-sac, which has a low air pressure and then a higher air pressure above it, and then the air pressure of the tunnel. When he gets out, he loses his respirator. His nose is bleeding. But he knows that he's in England. He says, I knew that I was in Wessex, for I had taken care to go to a lecture on the subject before starting. Wessex lies above the room in which we are not talking now. It was once an important state. Its kings held all the southern coast from the Andredswald to Cornwall, while the Wansdyke protected them on the north, running on the high ground. The lecturer was only concerned with the rise of Wessex, so I do not know how long it remains an international power, nor would the knowledge have assisted me. To tell the truth, I could do nothing but laugh during this part. There was I with a pneumatic stopper by my side and a respirator bobbing above my head, imprisoned all 3 of us in the grass-grown hollow that was edged with fern. He also talks about how Kuno discusses how he was naked. He says, it was easy at first. The mortar had somehow rotted. As soon as I pushed some of the tiles and clambered after them into the darkness, and the spirits of the dead comforted me. I don't know what I mean by that. I just say what I felt. I felt for the first time that a protest had been lodged against corruption, and that even as the dead were confronting me, so I was confronting the unborn. I felt that humanity existed and that it existed without clothes. How could I explain this? It was naked. Humanity seemed naked, and all these tubes and buttons and machineries neither came into the world with us, nor will they follow us out, nor do they matter supremely while we are here. Had I been strong, had I torn off every garment I had and gone out into the outer air unswaddled, but this is not for me, nor perhaps for my generation. I climbed with my respirator and my hygienic clothes and my dietetic tabloids. Better thus than not at all. Okay, a lot here. First of all, this is very interesting. He's setting up a sort of new Eden, right? A new rebirth out of the machine. He's further saying that Kuno, while having the visionary insight, is not the one to do it, in large part because he's already established the fact that the machine has kept people artificially weak and sick so that he couldn't actually do it. And he says, I think this is most important. The machineries neither came into the world with us, nor will they follow us out, nor do they matter supremely while we are here. That, I think, is an extremely profound statement here, because so many of us today think of like futurists, utopians, technologists, treat the machine as God. And in chapter 3, we'll see the sort of parodies that arise when you treat the machine as a god. And what's interesting here is that, again, the attitude of the machine saving us was existent in 1909. So I guess it's no great surprise that he would criticize that aspect. But what is a surprise is how prescient he was in describing how the machine would develop. In broad strokes, it has more or less developed the way he thinks. So we don't all live underground. We still live above ground, but there's a certain level of consistency, a certain level of rhyme to what we're having. So what he predicted rhymes with what we see, which is extremely interesting and prescient. Another example of history here. He says, can't all your lecturers see that it is we that are dying and that down here the only thing that really lives is the machine? We created the machine to do our will, but we cannot make it do our will now. It was robbed us of the sense of space and the sense of touch. It has blurred every human relation and narrowed down love to a carnal act. It has paralyzed our bodies and our wills, and now it compels us to worship it. The machine develops, but not on our lies. The machine proceeds, but not to our goal. We only exist as blood corpuscles that course through its arteries, and if it could work with us, without us, it would let us die. Oh, I have no remedy, or at least only one, to tell men again and again that what I have seen the hills of Wessex as Alfred saw them when he overthrew the Danes. So to unpack this here, this goes along with what I've been saying with the development of the machine broadly. One, there was a stage in which there were men producing machines for the first time in the 19th century, and they believed that they were the creators of the machines and that they were intentionally building them for their own benefit. In an episode that I have not yet finished the work on, the idea that the machine is autonomous, and in some sense always was, and that leads to the fact that no one's in control of the machine is something that I'll get to in a future episode on Monday. But it's sort of hinted at here, because then the machine gets to a point where there's, I guess, rough parity, because, the council that runs the machine could still tell people to stop flying faster than the sun in chapter 1, but eventually even they can't control the machine. It keeps growing and growing and growing. And so the buy-in is that it's going to help us get what we want. But then once we become more and more dependent on it and it grows more and more and displaces us, then it's we who need it. And you wonder if the directors of The Matrix had read this. Because again, we only exist as the blood corpuscles that course through its arteries. And if it could work without us, it would let us die. I mean, in that one sentence, we have the entire Matrix, which is just like, it's something else. Now, what's interesting here with Wessex and Cornwall and then Wessex and Alfred, he's tying together the idea that there is something real before the machine and outside the machine. Obviously, there's nature itself. We've already mentioned the stars, the mountains, hills. But then there's also a history before the machine, a people before the machine. Kuno is a kind of hero from Plato's cave, and also not quite a new Adam, not quite. But he's realizing that there will be a time when humanity will be able to live without the machine. It may not be those that are trapped inside. And we'll get to this a little bit later. In chapter 2, we do hear that there are other people living outside, the people that had been made homeless, but they were able to figure out how to live outside. And so there's another instance where he talks about the hills, which is very interesting. He's describing the earth as a kind of living organism. It was evening before I climbed the bank. The sun had very nearly slipped out of the sky by this time. I could not get a good view. You who have just crossed the roof of the world will not want to hear an account of these little hills. The roof of the world is an allusion to the Himalayan mountain range. I saw low, colorless hills, but to me they were living, and the turf that covered them was skin under which their muscles rippled, and I felt that those hills had called with incalculable force to men in the past, and that men who had loved them. Now they sleep, perhaps forever. They commune with humanity in their dreams. Happy the man, happy the woman who awakes the hills of Wessex. For though they sleep, they will never die. Now, So there's all these illusions being woven together here, but the idea is that as long as there's something real outside that we can appeal to outside of the machine, in this case it's nature, you can realize you can take sort of comfort and solidarity with other people that lived outside before and enjoyed the landscape, and then future people that might enjoy the landscape. Now, the title of this chapter is called The Mending Apparatus. It's sort of I don't remember what they're called, but it's sort of like those things in the Matrix that chase the Nebuchadnezzar around trying to kill it. Now, the mending apparatus isn't necessarily trying to kill people. It looks like white worms. He describes them as white worms. And what he then does is says that they eventually came looking for him. And they pulled him back. And, well, they brought him in senseless back into the machine. And the last little bit of this section of his discussion with his mother, I will share on the screen. So let me do that here. Share screen. Okay. The machine stops. It's pretty good here. Here his story ended. Discussion of it was impossible, and Vashti turned to go. It will end in homelessness, she said quietly. I wish it would, retorted Kuno. The machine has been most merciful. I prefer the mercy of God. Okay, so I guess in this point, Forrester is sort of saying, well, okay, maybe there is some deistic God out there. By that superstitious phrase, do you mean that you could live in the outer air? Yes. Have you ever seen round the vomitories the bones of those who were extruded after the Great Rebellion? Yes. Have you ever seen round the vomitories? They were left there where they perished for edification. A few crawled away, but they perished too. Who can doubt it? And so with the homeless of our day, the surface of earth supports life no longer, indeed. Ferns and little grass may survive, but all higher forms have perished. Has any airship detected them? No. Has any lecturer dealt them? No. Then why this obstinacy? Because I have seen them, he exploded. Seen what? Because I have seen her in the twilight, because she came to help when I called, because she too was entangled by the worms, and luckier than I was killed by one of them piercing her throat. He was mad. Vashti departed, nor into the troubles that followed did she ever see his face again. So there was apparently this event called the Great Rebellion. I don't exactly know where this would fit into the broader history of the machine. In the last episode, I mentioned there were epochs. There was the literature epoch. There was the era epoch of scientific conquest. I think, given the structure of the story thus far, it's probably sound to assume that it was at the end of the scientific epoch that this Great Rebellion took place. And what's interesting here is Vashti says, a few crawled away. They perished too. Who can doubt it? Right? They didn't bother to see who got away. So the question, it's difficult to know in what sense these people were killed. Were they killed by the machine trying to escape? Were they killed by the shock of going into nature, not properly conditioned to survive? I suppose it doesn't matter. The machine doesn't seem to be too overtly violent since it doesn't kill Kuno, but it does kill the woman that he saw, so I guess it depends. And these are, quote, the homeless. And so he then says he saw such people, that they exist. Now, presumably, they come out at night or they use camouflage or something in order that they can't be detected by... Well, the thing is, nobody looks for them, right? That's kind of ridiculous for Vashti to ask. She says, never been seen by any airship. But, if the airship flies higher than the Himalayan mountains, as we know they do, why would you see a man on the ground? That's a long way down to look. And obviously nowadays we'd have sensors and thermal imaging, something that Forrester doesn't envision. But hey, he envisioned the internet and streaming services and self-repairing machines, so I'll cut him some slack on not envisioning thermal imaging. But the issue here then is, again, tying it all back up, this idea that in order to escape the machine, you have to first have... Okay, so I think if we look at Kuno's art from book 1, from chapter 1 to chapter 2, it's this. The first step in leaving the machine is a mental step. You have to derive inspiration from outside the machine. Hence, the stars. Whereas if you only derive inspiration from inside the machine, like Vashti, you'll never even want to leave. Secondly, you'll need to achieve some sort of physical conditioning, which Kuno is unable to completely fulfill. He's only able to briefly crawl around in the open air, but something he thinks is possible, and he knows to be possible because people have already out there, even if he hasn't seen it. And so that's the first step. How do you leave the machine? And also, what is the importance of the machine? It's something that was, is, and at some point will no longer be. And I think that sort of like cosmic or large scale world historical perspective is important to maintain. Many empires come and go, many social and material conditions come and go, and Forster is arguing that the machine will come and go as well. Now, there's more commentary that I have, but some of what I want to say will have to wait for chapter 3, where it's really, really prescient. But the other thing that is, with regard to the philosophy, there's the philosophy of Protagoras, man is the measure of all things. In one sense, literally as a ruler measuring stick, but also in a sense of self-directedness. He seems to be arguing. The stars are this sort of connection to the world outside, that the machine is not completely shut off, that can propel some to desire to leave. And the idea that he read history from the machine archives, which were relevant and inspirational to him. So I think we can say also tentatively that reading history, specifically about the Saxons, the Wessex, also inspired him. And what's interesting is that's exactly what inspired me. I've mentioned on previous episodes that I developed a love of history first by playing Age of Empires in 1997, 1998. And that, you could argue Age of Empires is a level 1 simulation. It's trying to be accurate, even though it's just a video game. But you have one of two courses. You could either go deeper into the simulation or take the history and run with that. Ultimately, I took the history and ran with it. And that's exactly what Kuno's doing in order to escape. Now, he wasn't able to escape. And spoiler alert, the machine stops. It's the name of the title. So things don't turn out super well for Kuno in the end. But he's a sort of archetype of, this human spirit to break free from constraints and to go back to the natural world itself. And so, yeah, that's tonight's lecture. This was a bit of a shorter chapter than chapter 1. Chapter 1 is a bit longer because it's exposition and trying to establish everything. Let's check out the chat. We have Siren Energy Zero, hello. Actual Physical Kelp, hello. Vultra, hello. Aha. Evidence violates community guidelines, hello. Douglas, yeah, okay, hello. I'll just say that. Forbidden Anthropologist, hello. Let's see. Where was it? The Nick Land thesis. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Don't forget to tune in next Thursday for the final installment of Machine Stops, Chapter 3. And again, don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Telegram, Locals, and support me on Locals and buy me a coffee. This is Todd Lewis, the Praise of Flight Podcast, signing off.